Twice each year, at least in a normal year, Vermont's top economists gather at the State House in Montpelier for a high-profile briefing. They are there to tell the governor and top lawmakers what is going on in the state economy, in the national economy that will impact our lives and our spending and our jobs in the year ahead. Well, the other day they told that group they see an extraordinary turnaround.
When you think of this disaster essentially ending up being this gigantic financial windfall, who would have guessed? But that's what happens when you get deficit spending on the level that we're seeing it.
This is a grand experiment in Keynesian economics.
This morning, we've invited economists Tom Covet and Jeffrey Carr, who you saw in that clip, to join us to tell us more about what they see unfolding here in the year or two ahead. Joining us this Sunday on the left, Jeff Carr, state economist for the administration. On the right, Tom Covet, state economist for the legislature. Both have their own economic consulting firms in the state. They've been doing this a long time. Welcome to you both. Your presentation to the emergency board the other day, to the governor and to top lawmakers, was pretty extraordinary. The bottom line, you see a very robust recovery for our state coming out of the pandemic. Is that right? Tom, I'll start with you.
Yes, absolutely. And it's this avalanche of federal money that's driving it. You know, we're in the really extraordinary position of having weathered and are still in the midst of the most significant pandemic in more than 100 years. And we're ending up benefiting from that by virtue of the fact that the federal government has stepped in a way that's been unprecedented since the Second World War.
Jeff, you concur. I mean, you guys have to agree on this. Was there much debate?
No, there wasn't. Actually, this is our third forecast that we've done since the COVID pandemic really started to unfold in the state. And so we know a little bit more each time, both economically, also the amount and the nature of the federal fiscal stimulus, but also what the federal monetary policy authorities were doing to, because they learned their lessons from the Great Recession back in the mid to late 2000s, when a liquidity crisis made the whole situation worse with the Great Recession. And I agree with Tom. I think it's transformative. I think it's still unfolding in ways which we're trying to get our arms around, but clearly it's supported the economy. I mean, you know, the point I think I had made earlier at the emergency board meeting was the state lost 63,500 non-farm payroll jobs when the public health measures necessitated us to shut down parts of the economy. We had a year in fiscal year 2021, which ended June 30th, you know, from a revenue perspective, that was far stronger than the previous fiscal year that happened prior to the pandemic. And we had a stronger year in terms of our consumption tax revenues, in terms of our corporate and our personal income tax revenues, and many of the other revenue sources like the property transfer tax. And we did this all while the state is still down almost 19,500 jobs. And under ordinary circumstances, if we were doing a forecast update where the economy was down 19,500 jobs over a year and a half period, it'd be a 5-alarm fire.
Right. Let's talk about pressure on wages. Now, everybody's hiring, it seems, and hospitality, among others, is really struggling to hire. Are we all going to make more money as a consequence?
I think wages are definitely going up. We've seen that. Some of this will be resolved depending upon the epidemiological path of this whole situation. But I think, you know, there's several factors that people cite for not being in the labor force, and that's what's creating this bottleneck and driving wages up. And health concerns are a big one, but also the most commonly cited reason people are out of the labor force is caring for children or caring for other family members who have either health or or they can't go to school, things like that. So it also mentioned are the unemployment benefits that have been enhanced and extended. But that's number 3 in the list of things that are causing people to not be in the labor force. So as more people come back in, assuming that health outcomes are improved, that'll soften it a little bit. But I think there's going to be considerable wage growth.
Let's assume you're right about that. We have also seen the value of housing soar, and you wonder, is this a bubble? Couple of factors. You both cited an influx of people from other states who are buying up property here in part because of the state's reputation for responsible management through this pandemic. But it's also making it almost impossible for lower wage, even middle income people to afford to buy a house. What's going on?
Well, I certainly agree with Tom that this whole situation is pandemically driven, and certainly the next stage of the fight to address the pandemic, I think, is going to have a lot to say about where it is that we come out in the long run on this. And quite frankly, we're all kind of trying to figure out how this whole thing is going to unwind, and all the things that you pointed out in your question, I think is driven by friction in both the labor market and in the supply chain. The other thing that's, I think, driving, particularly on the property transfer tax side, with the magnitude and number of the transactions and the higher end of the price range for which real estate is being transacted, a lot of it's coming from out-of-state buyers. We know that from the filings of the property transfer tax, and because they're buying in the upper end, I think a lot of that has been helpful in terms of driving, at least temporarily, real estate markets. I don't think a lot of low and moderate income people are competing with them in the price range where some of these out-of-state buyers are right now, although it puts a lot of oomph under the entire market, and it certainly, impacts even some of the lower end transactions. But how much of this is going to continue over the longer term? I think it's still very much up in the air. It's the flip side of being successful in terms of managing the public health issues here in Vermont, which I think we've done a very good job. But you're only known for what you did in your last action.
Right.
Okay.
Vermont still has, $1 billion to spend, and there could be more in an infrastructure package.
More.
All right. Broadband. That's a top priority for the administration, for the legislature. How transformational is high-speed broadband to every address for our long-term economy?
It's huge. It is a basic core piece of infrastructure in the same way that roads and bridges and highways are. And this isn't new. I've been a little bit of a broken record on broadband investment, even pre-pandemic, as an economic development investment that makes a lot of sense. You get big returns because it allows, through remote work, it allows Vermont to compete with large urban areas and other places that have very high-paying jobs and a lot of jobs. So this is really an investment with a lot of payback that exists, and it could be transformational. Just to step back a minute on your question about housing, though, we're not in a bubble right now, but we very likely could be soon. And what's happening in real estate is that there is a huge asset repricing that's going on. And you're seeing it with equity market pricing, the stock market prices running up. And right now, there are not a lot of other good places for people who don't feel like there's a lot more growth in stocks to put their money. Bonds are going nowhere. And so real estate's starting to get some of that investment money, and it's very, very substantial quantities at the same time that interest rates are very low, and at the same time that for the last 10 years, very little new real estate stock has been added. So we've had very low levels of building for 10 years. We were forecasting big increases in real estate prices without the pandemic. We had a 41% increase in forecast for property transfer tax payments. And, that's rare that we have that kind of a year-on-year forecast. And it was 73%, I think, year-end fiscal 21. So it just shows you what's happening. But everything's ripe for real estate prices to rise a lot more than they have so far.
We'll have to leave it there, but thank you both. Jeff Carr, Tom Cavett, appreciate you being here on NBC5 In Depth.
Great. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.
Coming up, the Canadian border will reopen to vaccinated Americans tomorrow. What you can expect.